Do you find yourself sitting there stressed when you're like, oh my God, I just want things to be different. I just want things to be different. Well, that is where you're going to have to really focus on accepting things as they are, not as you want them to be. And the importance of that is going to make you have such a different life and view on life versus living in this box. And that is what we are going to talk about today. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It is your girl, Lori, and man, we're in February, guys. I think I told you that last week. We're in February, and it's very close to Love Day, which, by the way, you don't have to get the biggest diamond in the world to show somebody how much you love them. It's perfectly fine to just say love you and then just demonstrate, show them in different ways. It doesn't have to be a giant diamond. But if that's your jam too, feel free to do that and then send me one as well. We are going to continue these really in-depth worksheets over on Patreon. So that's going to be no different today. And Patreon is going to go really deep into a lot of the reasons that we are going to talk about today, and then give you a little bit of guidance on how to start shifting that perspective and what that's going to look like. So if that's your jam, head over to Patreon. It's patreon.com / the Positivity Experience, or you can just click on or copy the link. Anywhere that you're getting this podcast right now, you can just put that little link right up into the browser. But I really want to talk to you about this today because I think this is a really big thing. And part of what we're going to talk about today, just like the week last week or week before last, just like week before last, how when I was doing this, I was like, oh my gosh, this one needs its own podcast. And I'll tell you what that is when we get to it, because there's going to be various reasons as to why this happens. And you're going to find, and I think I said this to you, and you're going to find this in just about any type of consistent content about how you can better yourself and what that looks like and how to live your best life. There's only so many ways to do that. The issue that people run into is they keep wanting the magic pill. They want that instant gratification. They want it to be easy. And then you're like, oh, I've heard that before. Yes, because there's only so many ways to get you to the space of the life that you're seeking. We make life so much more difficult as humans because sometimes the easiest things you're like, wait, that's too easy. I don't know if you've ever seen that. You're like, well, that was easier than I thought. Like that was too easy. But yet sometimes we make life difficult. So this is no different. So let's talk a little bit about it so you can understand it. I mean, I'm pretty sure that you're aware of it. How many times have you said to yourself, oh my God, why can't they just do that? Oh, I just want this to be so different. Why? Why? Why can't this be how I want it to be? You want it to be something that it isn't, right? This is where radical acceptance is going to come into play. I have a whole different podcast way back in the day that you can find on the feed on radical acceptance. And I'll do another one eventually because radically accepting something is exactly as it is. Well, it is what it is. That's literally what it basically is. And so I want to talk to you about some reasons why you might be facing that. And you may find yourself going, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. And others you might be like, I don't really have that issue. And that's okay. So cognitive dissonance, which we talked about last week, is a massive piece of this. This is why I wanted to do this podcast right after that. So as you remember, it's like, where you're like, oh, well, I know this. Wait, I believe this, but wait, it contradicts what I believe or how I live my life, right? So when you're in cognitive dissonance about not accepting things as they are, now, by the way, this isn't just situations. These are relationships. These are various things in your life, right? And so when you're aware of this, then you can kind of go back to that distortion, especially on Patreon where you had the worksheet, but go back to the regular podcast too. And I think you're going to be able to kind of see how that dissonance is sort of affecting you, but how it affects it in this situation is through denial. You're trying to rationalize it. You are in denial of it and you selectively see it the way it is. So you're in denial. It's like when people cross over, right? When people die, people are like, yeah, I just have a hard time accepting that, which is very normal, by the way. That's part of grief. But it's when you refuse to accept it. It's the same thing with like a relationship. When you refuse to accept that the relationship is done and you try to make it different, you try to fit it into a box, you're in denial. That's all that is. You're in denial. And you got to be honest in that. Like, this isn't to beat you up. This isn't to tell you to feel bad and get angry at yourself. No, we're not going to do that here. Okay. But it is something that you can understand, because then when you understand why you can't accept it or why you're doing something, well, then that puts the power back in your hands so you can change it. Okay. So that's the big thing, is, do you want to change it? Because it will come with much work, much consistency, and acceptance that some of the people that you might start this journey with is not going to be on your life and in your life. And that could even be downright to your parents or your adult children. I mean, it's not just for the random friends or the acquaintances. That's the easier part. I mean, it can be able to still be sad. That's the easier part. So it's the dissonance, right? And again, go back to the podcast that we did last week. And it really is going to help you kind of understand. And we know that there's other areas, right? There's anxiety, there's depression, there's mood instability. But that's a reason. That is a reason. That is not an excuse for you not to do it. So really, the dissonance is going to come with time. It's going to come with you really working on that and accepting that it is your personal journey to do. Okay. So emotional attachments, right? You think, oh, well, there's an attachment with people. And don't forget, I have that attachment series on my YouTube. Well, yeah, I don't know that I'm just attached to people. Yeah, you can actually be emotionally attached to outcomes and beliefs. Like, you are emotionally attached to it. You see that a lot in politics, in religion, in how somebody is living their life. Like, you really can see that really expand. And that might be you as well, right? So be honest with that. But you can really be aware of it when it comes to other people. But if you have desires of something, if you have an outcome. So let's say, let me give you an example of that. Let's say growing up, you decided, I'm going to be a nurse, a doctor. It doesn't matter. I'm going to be a nurse. Okay. I'm going to be a nurse, and I'm going to hopefully be married there by 28. I'd like to have 2 kids by 31. Okay. Now you get real head driven onto this. Okay. So now you've created this desire, this belief that this is what has to happen. Now you're like 10, maybe you're 15. This has got to happen. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to find my person. I'm going to have some kids. Okay. You've created a scenario, and you're making a scenario a high standard that may never be met because you're having to deal with other people. Like, you can't just be like, well, I have a relationship and have kids at 28 or 30. Sure, that's a good desire, but that doesn't mean that's going to happen, because there's other people in your life, or will come into your life, that have their own goals and their own lives. And then if you get attached to that outcome, you ignore red flags left and right. You're now 26. You may have decided, oh God, this whole nursing thing is just too much for me. I think I'm going to do radiology. I don't know, something else, right? Where it's less schooling, or it's a different skill set for you. And now in your head, you've told yourself, well, I failed at this. No, you created some high standard that was never going to be met out of perfectionism, right? And that's a big thing. Your perfectionism, that's a big one into next week's topic as well. But that emotional attachment to this outcome you're going to bypass everything, right? Because now you're 21, 22. You've gone through, general studies of college. You've even gone through, let's say you've even got pinned, right? You've got pinned for the 2 years 2 years in the associates or whatever. But you want to go deeper. Well, actually, you haven't even finished school. And you're just like, you know what? God, I said I was going to do this. But I don't want to do this. But I said I have to do this. You don't have to do this. If you don't want to be a nurse anymore, don't be a nurse. Like, it's okay. It's great to have big dreams. I always want you to have big dreams, big goals, big dreams, big desires. Love that. But they still have to be realistic. And you have to understand that just because you have emotionally attached to this does not mean it needs to happen. In that same scenario that you said, well, I got to be married. I got to be with somebody at 28. Now you're 29, you don't have a person yet. And now for some odd reason, you feel like you're so behind time, and all your other friends are in relationships, and all these other people are starting to have children, and you're not. Well, that's okay. You're not on that time. And you're not even on the time that you set yourself. Totally different when we're talking about SMART goals in your day-to-day life. Hey, and this year, these are the things I want to accomplish. These are the micro goals that I need to do. Totally different. So when you become emotionally attached to these things, And that's just one example. It could be anything, honestly. Well, now it's hard for you to accept it as it is because you're like, it was supposed to be different, but it's not. But it is not. I don't care how much you want it to be different. I do not care. It does not matter. If a person is done with you and they're out of a relationship, you do not need that cognitive closure. You really don't. And you don't need to say, but I wanted it to be different. I hear you. I validate it, mourn it, but it isn't that way. It is what it is. So a big piece of that is that emotional attachment. And so a lot of times too, you've emotionally invested in this. Let's say you've been thinking about this since you were 9. Let's say you were 9 and you watched something and you were like, this is what I'm going to do. This, okay. So now you've invested in this sort of kind of goal, but kind of like this has to happen or my life is a disaster. Because now you're creating these really big parallels and it becomes problematic. And so you're like, yeah, but this emotional investment, you see that a lot. I see that in my practice, a lot in relationships that, I've been with them for, 25 years and have kids. And I don't know, like I've been there. Okay. It doesn't matter how long you've been there. Obviously you've been checked out for often 8 to 10 years. You don't want to be there in the first place, but now you have this emotional investment. So for some bizarro reason, you want to stay in it and you do not have to. It doesn't mean it's going to change. This is where that positivity bias comes into play, not thinking positive. It's this bias to see things as you want them. And then as something sparks, you're like, oh my God, yes. This is why you see, just outside of trauma bonds and things like that, which are real. But you see a little hint of something or somebody shows you or displays something for you that leads more into what that cognitive bias is. You're like, oh my God, look. So now you're grasping at straws and you're hoping that it's going to be different. And then you get disappointed when it isn't different. But it was never going to be different. So that's a big part. That's the emotional attachment. Control and agency. Okay. Agency, ambiguity, ambiguity. You know what I'm trying to say. My tongue is tied. And control is a big one here. Your ego, your fear of the unknown, which is next week's podcast, because fear of the unknown needs its own podcast and it's coming to you next week with a worksheet and everything, because you can fear the unknown all you want. Okay. Yeah. Anxieties and different things make that a little bit more difficult, but you can fear it all you want. It's going to be what it's going to be. And the more you try to control the outcome, the harder it is going to be on your mental health, your relationships, and everything thereafter. Because when you're trying to control it, so this goes into the emotional attachment, right? When you're trying to control that outcome. Well, now people are like, oh my God, why? You ever see people where you're like, oh my God, you're so controlling. Like you need to control everything because they don't like the uncertainty. Well, if you have the fear of the unknown, that's fear of uncertainty. If you cannot embrace that, now you guys know, to be fair, I've been practicing Buddhism for many, many, many years, almost 2 decades, not quite yet. And it's a big piece of staying present. It's being connected, but not attached. There's a lot that comes into that, and control of letting go of the control of the fear of the unknown is probably more freeing than you'll ever understand. But you got to be willing to go with the flow and know that no matter what choice you make, it 1000% always works out. Now, it doesn't always work out the way you want it to work out. That's different. It always works out because it's either demonstrating to you what is not for you. Babe, this isn't for you. This is not the path for you. But it works out because it's showing you. The problem and the issue arises where that control and that emotional attachment comes into play. And it's like, oh my God, but no, it has to be this way. It doesn't. It doesn't. Now, again, this is going to take time. You're not just going to listen to this podcast and be like, got it. But you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You got to be willing to come out of the ego. You got to be willing to actually do the long work. And it is supposed to be hard. Do not tell me it is hard. Life is hard. Not doing it is even harder because then you're going to stay in the same space. Right? So when you feel helpless to the fact that you have no control, that goes into, it can go into, a lot of things. A lot of it can be ego, right? Because you're playing with other players and then you're disappointed in the other players. And you're like, okay, well, I'm disappointed. Okay, cool. You're allowed your feelings, but they're not facts. And a lot of times you're disappointed and they didn't even know this storyline that you had written. And even if they did, they shouldn't adhere to the storyline. So that's a big one, right? The big one is, your the spot of agency and your control. And that's a really big one. So the fear of uncertainty has its own podcast next week, which I talked about. And the fear of uncertainty is many people don't like ambiguity. Oh my God, I know how to speak. Ambiguity. Ambiguous, see, that's easier than yeah. So they don't like that. They like it to be, I know for a fact that this is going to happen. I know how I want it to be. I know that if I do A, B is definitely going to happen versus it is what it is. I mean, the reality is it is what it is. So for me, and I want to be very descriptive here, I said for me, okay, this is not a judgment on anybody else, but I have to preface this by saying this because this is how I work through my own trauma. For me, is to accept that everything I went through was what it was. The molestation is what it is. The mom passing is what it is. Life in general is what it is. It's not good. It's not bad. It is. That is not disconnected. That is not disengaged. That is acceptance. Now I said for me, and I will tell you that a lot of my clients find that very helpful when you can look at your past, especially no matter what the trauma was for you, and not forget about it, but not give it power. And it does take a lot of effort, a lot of time, and a lot of consistency. But for me, I would not change my past because it is what it is. And it has given me more knowledge than I could learn in any type of a school ever in my life. And it has helped me be able to overcome things that I think oh my God, I cannot speak, generationally and past, the people before us and, ancestrally, it has broken a cycle because I was able to accept it. So again, it's big. It takes a lot of work to get there. And saying that things are what they are doesn't mean that you're dismissing past behaviors. It doesn't mean that you're in allowance of it. It means that you're not allowing whatever that trauma was to control you, which in my book, for me, was a serious life and game changer, like a serious life and game changer. And, the thing is your comfort zone predictability is where you think you're safe. Nothing, and I mean not one thing grows in the comfort zone. You will not grow in the comfort zone. You will not expand your knowledge in the comfort zone. It doesn't happen, and that's a fact. Now, the comfort zone is great. You can nurture things there. You can practice things there. Beautiful, beautiful place for, hey, you know what? I've done a lot of work. I'm just going to chill today, and I'm going to sit in my comfort zone. And I don't just mean behind TV or stuff like that. Just, doing the things that are pretty predictable. But the issue comes into play when you are afraid to step out of that comfort zone because you're afraid of what's going to happen. Let me tell you, if you walked out of the house right now and, I don't know, a meteor fell on top of your head, what are you going to do? Stay in the house the rest of your life because that could happen? I mean, you can't say that it couldn't happen. I mean, weird things fall from the sky a lot. You'd be surprised how many times weird things fall from the sky. Yes. Yes, they do. Look it up. Okay. So my point is, yes, you can go to the mall and something can happen. You can drive a car. Something can happen. You can go to church. Something can happen. If you live your life in fear, you are not living your life. And you think that you're doing yourself a favor by being in the comfort zone and not exposing yourself to it. And you are not. You are 1000% not doing yourself any favor because then you're even in more comparison. And then you go a little bit into victim mentality and then you're trying to make it make sense. And then everything in your life seems out of control. I mean, that's just part of it. So it's accepting that the comfort zone is it is fake. Like it's not real. You just become used to it because the things that you face that are challenges, if you do them more and more and more, well, now you're comfortable with it, right? Think about that. I'm pretty sure, I don't necessarily remember taking my first steps. You might. I don't know many people who did, but I'm pretty sure I didn't just get up and start walking. I think I probably fell. I'm sure as clumsy as I am even now, I'm sure I hit my head multiple times. And it was uncomfortable, right? It was unfamiliar territory. It just wasn't something that we did. Well, now we just do it. Now, okay, there's a comfort to it. I mean, assuming that you can, right? There's a comfort zone to it. Because it becomes automatic. So what you got to remember is in order to be confident in it and in order to be consistent or, consistency is going to be the key there. but you got to be willing to do it when you're uncomfortable. Okay, it's extremely, extremely important. Now, social and cultural, and you hear me talk about this in a lot of podcasts because, I mean, it's a thing, right? Especially with social media, which can be a complete nightmare. But social and cultural things can be very, very problematic in this area of accepting things as they are. So if you grew up with a certain expectation, right? So let's say mom and dad are lawyers. They have you. They have their own practice. They have their own law firm. And yep, in their mind, you've been on the planet for 30 seconds. Yeah, this person is going to be a lawyer. Okay. Throughout time, they're trying to be open, but they're really gearing you into the law field. And you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do law. Like, I'm so not into law. I just want to be a rock star. Like, whatever the case may be. Well, socially and culturally, and it doesn't even have to be cultural like religion, culturally within your family, this is an expectation. So with the expectation that comes into play, you now feel that you must achieve this. And the unknown, the fear, not the unknown, well, that's next week, but like that, well, things should be different, but they're not, can be really detrimental to your mental health. So you have to understand that you're also afraid of that judgment that comes with it, because then you have to eventually tell mom and dad, by the way, in this fictitious scenario, because I know it's not fictitious, somebody's going through this and it doesn't matter what your parents are, let them be disappointed. Let them be upset. Let them be, oh my God, because by the way, they're not upset for you. They're upset for them. They're upset for them. How's it going to look on them? Your kids did not go in your footsteps. They're going to do what? Oh my God, right? If that's the thing, let them judge you. And this may be one of those situations where I said, sometimes the people who start on your journey are not going to be on your journey. And that is now, unless you keep trying to take them and you try to smush them. You try to get them. You're like, okay, I just want you to be with me. If you could just accept it. This is the resistance to it. If you could just accept it, if you could accept that I want to do something different, our life would be so great. It is not that way. And they've demonstrated to you historically that it is not going to be that way. So you can want it all day long. You've heard me say before, if you keep running into the brick wall over and over again, it is not the wall, it is you. So this is where that radical acceptance, listen, we are, at least for me, being almost 53, grew up, watching these shows of like perfect families, right? That doesn't exist. And so you kind of go into that. And, that's another thing. Be careful what you're viewing. Just because you see people on social media that seem like they have it all together, you have no idea what they're going through. You have no idea if they have anxieties. You have no idea what they've gotten. I see this a lot when people start to get jealous, not just of celebrities, but like get jealous of what people have. Meanwhile, I know that they've been working really, really hard. They've sacrificed a lot of things. And then they're just looking at the gratification piece of it. And so I want you to understand that socially and culturally, you are still allowed to do something differently. You are allowed to not do what your family wants you to do. You are allowed those actions, but you got to understand that it's okay for you to be disliked. It's okay for people to be disappointed in you until you get to that space, and you might not be there right now, and that's okay. But until you get there, it's going to be really hard for you to expand and grow. Okay. Now, another part of it is personal identity. You may have identified yourself as a certain thing or person all your life. Now, I see this a lot in people's profession. If I say, oh, well, who are you? Right? So if I ask you right now, who are you? If you immediately went into, I'm a mother, or I'm a father, I'm a spouse, I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher, I'm a nurse, I'm a this. Okay, those are not who you are. That's what you do. I also have children, so I am also a mother, but that me being a mother does not define who I am. So your personal, going back to the attachment, right? And the emotional attachment. So if you take the emotional attachment, if you take the control, if you take the planning, and then you put all that together, you're like, well, wait a minute. My whole life, I just identified as, a hard worker. That's fine. I love that you have an amazing work ethic. Love that for you. But that can't be your identity, Being a mom and a dad and a spouse and a partner and a sister, that cannot be your identity. The amount of clients that I have that are empty nesters, not just moms, dads too, empty nesters, and then they literally have panicked because the last 18 years, 19 years of somebody's life, that's been your main focus. That cannot be your main focus. Take care of them, show them those things. If that's your main focus and now that person goes away, now we're creating even more problems, not even just for yourself. Now they don't call you every day. So now that's a problem. And then you feel some kind of way and now you're empty and now you're lost because you identified as a parent. You can be an amazing parent and a totally connected parent right there, but not attached and not in the space to where you have identified your person to that. And again, doesn't even have to be a person. You identify sometimes as jobs. I mean, how many people do you know? And in the States, this is a big thing. Overseas, and my clients over there, I swear, I think they have way more balance. They just do. I mean, the ones I talk to. But how many times have you heard somebody, and this could be you too, that is really ingrained in their job? Now, I love my job. I love my job so much, but I do have an off switch. I absolutely have an off switch. If I don't have an off switch, I'm going to burn out. But how many people do you know that are like almost proud that they're working 90 hours a week? That is really nothing to be proud of. We can take the pride away. If you're working 90 hours a week, now if you have your own business, you're trying to start it, sure, it's a short-term thing. But if you're trying to prove yourself, meanwhile, you don't want to deal with anybody else, you're kind of emotionally unavailable to everybody because your whole life is this job. That job is so not worth it. It is so not worth it because I'm going to tell you right now, identify yourself with that job all you want. Spend 120 hours a week in that job. If you walk outside and a meteor falls on top of your head, they'll be sad. They'll be like, oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? John's gone. John was our workhorse. What the hell are we going to do? Yeah, they miss you, but you know what? They're going to find somebody. Might not be John, but they'll find somebody to do the job. So yes, be a good worker, be a good parent, be those things, but don't let it identify you because then you're going to have a hard time accepting things as they are. You may have an adult child that just, for whatever reason, feels as though they had trauma with you because they're allowed to feel that way, and they just don't want to talk to you. You're allowed to lick your wounds and feel hurt. You really are. You're not allowed to manipulate it, and you're really not allowed to not accept it for what it is because you are going to live in that spin cycle of victim mentality, spin cycle of being upset and angry, and which anger is like frustration. So all of those things are going to come into play. Okay. Now, this is important. Temporal perspective. Okay. You're like, I know it does. Sounds like tempura, right? You're like, tempura. Now I want some tempura. No, but it's temporal perspective. And that means that you are present, focused, biased. This does not mean you are in the present and you're mindful. I am present, focused, biased. I need what I need right now. These are instant gratification scenarios. Okay. So important because it's in the temporal part of your brain. And so that's what you're saying, the instant gratification, which is what we all do at times. Oh man, I need to order this Amazon. I need to go to the grocery store. Oh, let me pick it up, which is great. All great options. But if you were solely focused on that instant gratification, I need this right now. My plan is right now. I'm almost 28. I'm supposed to be this. I'm supposed to be that. I need it right now. All of these things line up to where you're having a really difficult time. You're very resistant to it. Like I said, over on Patreon, I have a worksheet that'll kind of help you through it. And it's just really important that you understand that you're going to have to require, it is required. You're going to have to sacrifice the immediate gratification for the long-term possibility, right? You heard that word, of reaching that delayed gratification. I've talked to you about it before. You got to have delayed gratification. If everything was right now, which we know, by the way, from a human behavioral perspective, that is a natural response, but it is not the healthiest response. So it's the restructuring. You've got to restructure that piece of it, which we'll talk about next week here as well. And because that's why that fear of the unknown is really important, because that's essentially, you have the perfectionism, which is fake AF. all of these sort of ideas, these big goals that you're like, okay, but you have to understand, we all have dreams, we all have desires, we all have goals. Just because you don't reach them or they don't work out does not make you a failure. It means it absolutely worked out by showing you that, you know what, we thought that this was going to be effective, but it's not. And that's okay. Right? So that is why you are having a hard time accepting things as they are. That's why. Those are the reasons. And when you're aware of them, then you can correct and change them, right? So, love you guys. Accept things as they are, not as you want them to be, and life gets so much better.
Check it out.